I slumped onto my worn-out couch, letting out a long sigh as I loosened my tie. Another grueling day of debugging code and troubleshooting client issues had drained the life out of me. The soft hum of the city outside my high-rise apartment provided a strange kind of comfort as I finally let myself relax. My brain begged for a break. Maybe mindlessly scrolling through some YouTube videos would do the trick. Just as I was about to drift into digital oblivion, my phone buzzed. Aunt Mary. We weren't exactly texting buddies, so her name popping up was unexpected. I swiped the notification open. Ethan, I'm sorry to send this, but you need to see it. My stomach clenched. Curiosity tugged at me harder than caution, and with slightly trembling fingers, I tapped on the attached video. The screen lit up, and there he was, Ryan, my younger brother, 26, charismatic and completely carefree. He was lounging in one of the chairs in the common area downstairs, a beer in one hand, gesturing animatedly to a group of friends. I recognized a few faces, his usual crowd, including Sophia, his ex, who somehow still entertained his antics. Ethan's too soft, man, Ryan said, his voice echoing through the speakers. 3 years, and he hasn't asked me for a damn dime. Why would I pay rent when I've got a free ride? Dude's too busy coding to even notice. Laughter erupted, loud and obnoxious. Even Michael, my supposed best friend, was chuckling along. And he thinks I'm still figuring things out, Ryan added with a grin, leaning back like he owned the place. I make way more than he even knows. But hey, why waste it when I've got a sucker for a brother? My chest tightened, and I felt the sting of betrayal spread through me like poison. 3 years. For 3 years, I had let him stay here after his rough breakup. I had given him space, covered the rent, paid the bills, and never once pressured him to move out. I thought I was being a good brother. I thought I was helping him get back on his feet. But all along, I was just the idiot funding his lifestyle. My fingers curled around the phone, the video looping in my mind, each replay slicing deeper. The weight of his words pressed down on me, but instead of anger, a chilling calm settled over me. You needed to know, Aunt Mary's message read beneath the video. She was right. I did need to know. And now, it was time to do something about it. I didn't sleep that night. I lay there, staring at the ceiling as the city's glow filtered through the blinds, replaying Ryan's words over and over again. Free ride. Too dumb to ask for rent. The phrases echoed like a broken record, each time slicing a little deeper. I wasn't mad. No, this wasn't just anger. This was something colder, sharper, disappointment. 3 years. 3 damn years. I let him move in after his messy breakup with Sophia. He showed up at my door with a duffel bag and a defeated expression, claiming he needed a place to crash for just a couple of months. I didn't hesitate. He was my brother. I couldn't leave him hanging. I figured he'd get back on his feet eventually. Just a little time, Ethan, he had said, eyes glassy with fake gratitude. I'll figure things out. And like an idiot, I believed him. Months turned into a year. 1 year became 2, then 3. And through it all, Ryan had me fooled. He wasn't struggling. He wasn't scraping by. He was thriving on my dime. My grocery bill had doubled. My Netflix account hijacked. My oat milk gone within a day. I barely used my car, yet somehow I was paying for all the gas. Every month, I told myself, he just needs a little more time. But I was wrong. He had time. He just didn't care. I sat up, running a hand through my hair, the early morning chill biting at my skin. My mind was racing now, piecing together every missed sign I had ignored. The impromptu weekend trips, the designer clothes, the VIP concert tickets. He was living it up, while I was footing the bill. And the worst part? He knew exactly what he was doing. I swung my legs off the bed, planting my feet firmly on the hardwood floor. The coolness grounded me, steadied the storm brewing inside. Not anymore. I wasn't the pushover he thought I was. I wasn't going to let him keep walking all over me. A plan began to form in my mind, cold, calculated, and absolutely necessary. I wasn't going to blow up. I wasn't going to confront him in some dramatic showdown. No, I was going to play this smart. I grabbed my laptop and opened a new browser tab, typing in property management companies near me. If Ryan wanted to keep living here, he was going to do it by the rules. And if he didn't, he could find somewhere else to mooch. Within minutes, I had shortlisted 3 companies. I read through their services, comparing fees and lease agreement options. I wanted everything airtight, no loopholes, no wiggle room. I wasn't just kicking him out. I was giving him a choice. He could either step up and act like an adult, or he could pack his bags. But one thing was clear: the free ride was over. I leaned back in my chair, a grim sense of satisfaction settling in my chest. My mind was clearer than it had been in years. "You think I'm too dumb to kick you out, Ryan?" I muttered under my breath, a smirk tugging at the corner of my lips. "We'll see who's the idiot now." A week passed. I didn't say a word to Ryan. Not yet. I went about my days as if nothing had changed, working late, fixing myself dinner, minding my own business. I watched him out of the corner of my eye, though. His routine was the same. Wake up at noon, spend hours scrolling through his phone, head out for meetings that I knew were just hangouts at local bars, and return home late, smelling like craft beer and bad decisions. He was still comfortable, too comfortable, but that was about to change. My plan was already in motion. I'd finalized everything with the property management company a few days ago. They were efficient, just what I needed. The lease agreement was drafted, payment portals set up, and I was ready to drop the bomb. But first, I needed to sow the seeds of doubt. "Morning," I said casually one Saturday as I strolled into the kitchen. Ryan was slouched at the counter, lazily stirring a bowl of cereal. His eyes were glued to his phone, probably scrolling through Instagram stories of his latest adventures. He barely looked up. "Sup," he muttered, mouth full of sugary flakes. I poured myself a cup of coffee, taking my time, letting the silence hang just long enough to make it uncomfortable. I could feel his curiosity start to bubble. "Good. So," I said, keeping my tone light, almost bored. "What's your plan for next month?" That got his attention. Ryan glanced up, brows furrowed. "What do you mean?" I shrugged, taking a slow sip of coffee. "Just, you've been here for a while now. Figured you might be thinking about your next steps. You know, getting your own place or something." His spoon froze mid-stir. I watched the gears turning in his head. Panic flashed across his eyes for a brief second, but he quickly masked it with a lazy chuckle. "Baft, come on, man." He waved a hand dismissively. "Why would I move out? This setup's perfect. You don't mind me being here, right?" I smiled. "Of course not. Not yet. But," I added, voice still calm, "I've just been thinking. Maybe it's time for a little change." Ryan blinked. "Change?" I leaned against the counter, pretending to be deep in thought. "Yeah, like, maybe it's time to make things more official." His spoon clattered against the bowl. "Official? What the hell does that mean?" "Hook, line, sink, relax." I chuckled, waving him off. "Nothing crazy. Just, maybe it's time we talked about you contributing a bit more. You know, rent, bills, that sort of thing." Silence. Ryan's jaw clenched, but he forced a laugh. "Come on, Ethan. We're family. You're not serious, are you?" I tilted my head, giving him a casual shrug. "Why wouldn't I be?" His smile faltered. "Dude, I'm just getting back on my feet." His voice dropped, a hint of that old poor me tone creeping in. "You know, things have been tough. Here we go." I nodded slowly, playing along. "Yeah, but you've got a good job now, right? Making decent money? I mean, I saw that new jacket you bought last week. Looked expensive." "Oh, that?" He waved it off, eyes darting away. "It was on sale. Liar." I didn't press. "Not yet." I let the silence stretch again, taking another sip of my coffee, letting the discomfort sink deeper. "Look, Ryan," I said, voice softer now, almost sympathetic. "I'm not saying you have to move out. I'm just saying, maybe it's time we both started thinking long term. You know?" I could see the cracks forming. His confidence was slipping, and I wasn't even trying that hard yet. "Yeah," he mumbled, eyes fixed on his cereal. I guess I get that." I gave him a small smile, patting his shoulder lightly. "Cool. No rush. Just think about it." Planted. The next few days were interesting. Ryan was quieter, more cautious. I could see him second-guessing every little thing. He started washing his dishes, instead of leaving them in the sink. The living room was less of a war zone. He even offered to grab groceries one night. Guilt's a powerful thing, but it wasn't enough, because I wasn't just planting doubt. I was building a trap. The night before I planned to drop the bomb, I tested the waters one last time. "Hey," I said casually as we sat in the living room. "I've been looking at some places nearby. Just curious, in case you're thinking about moving out." Ryan's head snapped up. "Why would I move out?" I shrugged, flipping through my phone. "Just figured, since you've been here for a while, Ethan." His voice was tight now, defensive. "We talked about this. I'm not going anywhere." "Perfect." I smiled, hiding the satisfaction that burned in my chest. Cool. Just checking. Because tomorrow, everything was going to change. The next morning, I was up earlier than usual. I stood by the kitchen window, watching the sun creep over the horizon, casting a soft glow over the city skyline. The air was still, but I could feel a shift coming, a quiet storm about to break. Today was the day. I had been patient. I had played my part perfectly, planted the seeds of doubt, let them take root, and now it was time to reap the harvest. Ryan had no idea what was coming. By the time he stumbled into the kitchen around noon, hair disheveled, eyes half closed, I was already at the counter, sipping my second cup of coffee. "Morning," I greeted, voice calm. "Oh," he groaned, rubbing his face. "Morning." I watched him move around the kitchen, grabbing a protein bar, my protein bar, and a bottle of oat milk, my oat milk. "Some habits die hard. So," I said, keeping my tone casual, "I've been thinking about that conversation we had last week." Ryan froze mid-pour, the milk almost overflowing. "What conversation?" I hid my smirk behind the rim of my coffee cup. About contributing more, about rent." He set the bottle down, his shoulders visibly tensing. "Oh, that. Here we go." "Yeah," I nodded, placing my cup down. "I figured it's time we make things official." I reached for the manila envelope I had placed strategically on the counter, sliding it toward him. His eyes locked onto it like it was a ticking bomb. "What's this?" His voice was tight, cautious. "Your new lease agreement." I kept my tone light, almost friendly. "I hired a property management company to handle everything moving forward. Just to keep things professional." The silence that followed was deafening. Ryan blinked, his brain visibly struggling to process what I had just said. "Lease agreement? Yup." I leaned back against the counter, arms crossed casually. "All the details are in there. $1,200 a month. First payment due next week." His mouth opened, then closed. His face went pale, then red. You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm dead serious." I kept my expression calm, but inside, I was savoring every second. $1,200? His voice pitched up, disbelief dripping from every word. "That's insane. You can't charge me that much." "Actually," I said, tapping the envelope, "that's below market rate for this area. You're getting a steal, really." His eyes darted to me, searching for any sign that I was bluffing, but I wasn't. "Come on, Ethan." He tried a different approach, his tone shifting to something softer. "We're family. You're really going to make me pay rent like some random tenant?" I didn't flinch. "Yes." The word landed like a hammer. "But I can't afford that right now," he stammered, desperation creeping into his voice. "I mean, I'm still figuring things out." "No, Ryan." My tone was firmer now, the patience gone. "You've had 3 years to figure things out. You're not broke. You're not struggling. I've seen the new clothes, the weekend trips, the fancy dinners. You can't afford it." His face went red again, but this time, it wasn't from embarrassment. That's not fair." His jaw clenched. "You're really doing this to me?" "I'm not doing anything to you," I said, voice cool. "I'm giving you a choice." I pushed the envelope closer to him. "You can sign the lease and start paying rent, or you can move out." Silence. Ryan's jaw worked furiously, his mind racing for a way out. But there was none, and if I don't do either, he hissed, eyes narrowing. "Then," I said, voice calm but unyielding, "you'll get a 14-day notice to vacate. And if you still don't leave, I'll have to file for eviction." His eyes widened. Eviction? Seriously? Seriously. I let that word hang in the air, heavy with finality. For a moment, I thought he might explode. His fists clenched, his jaw tightened, and his breathing grew heavier. But then, I saw it, the realization. He had no way out. Checkmate. Ryan's shoulders slumped, and he let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. Unbelievable. Believe it. I picked up my coffee again, taking a slow sip as I watched him wrestle with the truth. You've got until the end of the week to decide, I said, voice calm. Sign the lease, or pack your bags. Ryan didn't respond. He just stood there, eyes glued to the envelope like it was a death sentence. Your call, bro. The next few days were tense. Ryan barely spoke to me. He was quieter, more withdrawn, avoiding me like the plague. He wasn't used to this version of me. The version that didn't cave. I could feel his anger simmering beneath the surface, boiling over in the form of slammed doors and clipped one-word answers. But I didn't budge. This was his mess, and he was going to clean it up. Friday night rolled around, and I was curled up on the couch with my laptop when I heard the front door slam shut. He was home. Ryan stormed into the living room, eyes blazing, jaw clenched. We need to talk. I didn't even look up. I'm listening. You really did it. His voice was low, almost incredulous. You filed the paperwork. Yes. Jesus, Ethan. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing like a caged animal. You're seriously evicting me? I finally looked up, meeting his gaze head on. I gave you options, Ryan. You just didn't like them. His face twisted, frustration boiling over. I can't believe you're doing this to me. I'm not doing anything. I stood up, closing my laptop with a calmness I didn't fully feel. You did this to yourself. Silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. So, what now? His voice was quieter now, almost defeated. I sighed, crossing my arms. Now, you have until Sunday to sign that lease. Or, you're out. I could see the gears turning in his head, the realization that this wasn't a bluff. It's your move, Ryan. Sunday came and went. Ryan didn't sign the lease. I wasn't surprised. I had given him every opportunity, but deep down, I knew he wasn't going to take it. He was too used to skating by, living off my generosity without lifting a finger, facing reality, taking responsibility. That wasn't in Ryan's playbook. So, I filed the eviction papers first thing Monday morning. It was surreal, really. Standing in the courthouse, signing documents that would legally force my own brother out of my apartment. But there was no hesitation, no guilt, because I had already given him more chances than he deserved. And now, it was time to reclaim my life. The silence that followed was deafening. Ryan didn't come home that night, or the next. For 3 days I barely saw him. He was avoiding me, slipping in and out of the apartment like a ghost, hoping that if he kept his head down, I might change my mind, but I didn't. On the 4th night, I was sitting on the couch, half watching some mindless show on Netflix, when I heard the front door creak open. He was back. I didn't move. I kept my eyes on the screen, pretending not to notice as he shuffled inside, kicking off his shoes and dropping his keys with a loud clatter. Ethan. His voice was quiet. I took a deep breath, letting the tension settle before turning to face him. Ryan. He stood in the doorway, looking different. The cocky, smug confidence was gone. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes tired and bloodshot, and for the first time in a long time, he looked lost. We need to talk. I raised an eyebrow. About this whole thing. His hand waved vaguely toward the envelope that was still sitting on the kitchen counter, the lease agreement he never signed. Look, I get it. I messed up. I didn't say anything. I just waited. I shouldn't have said all that stuff, he mumbled, his voice barely above a whisper. I was drunk. I didn't mean it. There it was. The excuse. You didn't mean it? I repeated, my tone flat. He nodded quickly, like a kid trying to get out of trouble. No, man. I was just venting, blowing off steam. Liar. I leaned back, crossing my arms. Venting? Yeah, he said, a little too eagerly. I didn't realize. I didn't think it would get back to you. I tilted my head, studying him. So, you're sorry because you got caught, not because you said it. That hit him. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He swallowed hard, eyes darting away. Ethan, come on. No, Ryan. My voice was steady now, the calm before the storm. You didn't just say those things. You believed them. 3 years, Ryan. I stood up, my voice finally carrying the weight of everything I had been holding back. 3 years I let you stay here. Rent-free, bills-free. Everything free. And the whole time you laughed about it behind my back. You bragged about how stupid I was for letting you stay. He looked away, jaw clenched, but he didn't deny it. I was never your brother in this, was I? I asked, the realization cutting deeper than I expected. I was just your safety net. Silence. And now that the net's gone, I took a step closer, my eyes locking onto his. You don't know how to stand on your own. Checkmate. Ryan's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him. I don't. He trailed off, rubbing the back of his neck. I found a few places, I said, my tone softer now. I walked over to my laptop, pulling up the listings I had bookmarked weeks ago. All within your budget. And one of the landlords is willing to waive the security deposit if you apply this week. His head snapped up, surprise flickering in his eyes. You did that? Of course I did. I met his gaze. No anger left, just exhaustion. Because despite everything, you're still my brother. For a moment, I saw it the old Ryan, the one who wasn't weighed down by entitlement and arrogance, the one I had hoped would come back after all this. Thanks, man. His voice was barely above a whisper. I'll check them out. Good. I nodded, stepping back. Because you've got a week. His eyes widened. A week? Eviction notice goes into effect after that, I said, my tone leaving no room for negotiation. I gave you options, Ryan, but this, I gestured around the apartment. This ends now. He didn't argue. For once, he just nodded. The next few days were eerily quiet. Ryan packed in silence, avoiding me as much as possible. I didn't push. I had said everything I needed to say. This was his burden now. On the last night, I found him in the living room, sitting next to a half-packed suitcase, staring at nothing. Ryan, he glanced up, eyes tired. Yeah, I don't hate you. He blinked, caught off guard. Could have fooled me. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. I just wish things had been different. He looked down, his jaw tight. Me too, but I let the silence stretch for a moment. You've got to stand on your own now. His lips pressed into a thin line, but he nodded. Yeah, I get it. The next morning he was gone. No dramatic goodbye, no heartfelt apology, just a packed suitcase and a text an hour later. I'm out. Good luck, Ethan. I stared at the message for a moment, then locked my phone. I wasn't angry. I wasn't relieved. I was just done. The days that followed felt lighter. The apartment was quiet, no slammed doors, no mess, no missing groceries, just peace. I walked through the living room, taking in the silence like it was an old friend I hadn't seen in years. It was mine again. I stood by the fridge, grabbing a bottle of my oat milk, and took a long sip. It tasted like victory. That night, as I sat on the couch, a glass of wine in hand, I stared out the window at the twinkling city lights. For the first time in years, I felt free. Ryan had underestimated me. He thought I'd never push back, but he was wrong. And now, he was learning the hard way. Freedom tastes a lot like oat milk. And damn, it was worth every drop. Story 2. I work for a marketing agency in Boston, Massachusetts. It's the kind of place where deadlines move faster than you can blink, and expectations are as high as the skyscrapers surrounding our office. I've been here for 7 years, working my way up from an entry-level marketing analyst to a senior strategist. I'm not flashy. I don't make a lot of noise. I just focus on the work, and I've always believed that good work speaks for itself. Then there's Brian Jacobs. Brian is the kind of guy who somehow always ends up at the center of things without actually doing anything. He has a knack for showing up at the right time, saying the right buzzwords, and nodding just enough to look involved. If you've ever met someone who manages to climb the corporate ladder by doing the bare minimum but taking credit for everything, yeah, that's Brian. He's been with the company for about 3 years, and in that time, I've seen him charm his way into promotions and assignments he had no business handling. I usually kept my head down and ignored him until he made the mistake of targeting my work. The big project that changed everything. A few months ago, the company landed a golden opportunity. We were competing for a multi-million-dollar account with a major tech client. Securing this deal wouldn't just mean a financial win, it would catapult our agency's reputation to the next level. Our CEO, David Patterson, trusted me with the project. I spent countless late nights and weekends analyzing data, building consumer profiles, testing different marketing strategies, and refining our presentation. I poured my heart and soul into it because I knew how much this account meant. Then, about a month before the final pitch, David assigned Brian to assist me. Assist? I knew what that meant. It meant Brian would sit in on meetings, ask surface-level questions, and somehow position himself as integral to the project. By the time it was all said and done, I wasn't worried, at least. Not at first. I've dealt with Brian before, so I documented everything. Every step, every revision, every email. I even kept detailed notes on what Brian did, or rather, what he didn't do. When I asked him to take the lead on consumer segmentation or polish the ad copy, he either found an excuse to be too swamped, or he'd half-heartedly push it back to me. But then, he crossed a line, the email that set it all in motion. A week before the big presentation, I logged in to review the final draft of the project, only to be met with access denied. My stomach dropped. I tried again. Same message. Confused, I checked the document history and saw that Brian had revoked my editing permissions. Then, as if on cue, an email popped up in my inbox. Subject, final presentation, completed. Hi team. Just wanted to share that the final version of the investor presentation is ready. I've been leading this project for the past few months, and I'm excited to present our strategy next week. Let me know if you have any questions. Best, Brian. I had to read it twice. Brian had locked me out of my own project and was now taking full credit. My jaw clenched, and my pulse pounded in my ears. I felt a mix of anger, disbelief, and, weirdly, amusement. He really thought he could pull this off? He had no idea what was coming, laying the trap. I didn't storm into David's office. I didn't send an angry email or raise hell. Instead, I did what any strategist worth their salt would do. I set a trap. For the next few days, I quietly gathered every piece of evidence I had. Emails, project drafts, timestamps, meeting notes, everything that proved I was the one who had developed the strategy and built the entire pitch. I also casually mentioned to David that I'd love a printed copy of the final presentation to follow along during the meeting. He didn't think twice about it and had a copy sent to me. Then I waited. The day of the presentation arrived. Brian strutted into the conference room like he owned the place, shaking hands, flashing his signature overconfident smile. I sat toward the back, calm and quiet. As the CEO, department heads, and investors took their seats, Brian opened the presentation and began reciting my work like a script. He was smooth at first, I'll give him that. But then came the moment I had been waiting for. The moment of reckoning. David leaned back in his chair and asked a simple, yet deadly question. Brian, could you walk us through your research process for identifying the key demographics? You could almost hear the gears grinding to a halt in Brian's brain. Well, we looked at consumer trends and, gathered data from various sources, he mumbled, his confidence evaporating. David's eyes narrowed. What methodology did you use to analyze those trends? Brian's hand twitched. He flipped through his notes, but there was nothing there to help him. It was a blend of different approaches, he stammered, his voice growing quieter. Silence filled the room. And then, as if on cue, Brian turned to me. His eyes pleaded for help. I gave him a sweet, practiced smile. Go ahead, Brian, I said, my voice smooth and dripping with irony. I'd love to hear your expertise. Brian's face drained of color. The final blow. Brian tried to recover. He babbled about team effort and collaboration, but it was too late. The room was dead silent, and everyone, Especially David could see right through him. Is that accurate? David asked, his eyes locking onto mine. I took my time. I flipped through the printed presentation, pretending to consider my response, though I already knew exactly what I was going to say. I'm glad Brian brought that up, I said smoothly, because I do have a few clarifications. And then I laid it all out. I walked through the research process, the data analysis, the branding strategies, every step that I had completed. I didn't rush. I spoke with clarity and precision, making it crystal clear who had done the real work. Brian started to sweat. His confident facade crumbled as he realized he was cornered. But I wasn't done yet. The nail in the coffin just as I finished, one of the investors, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret Liu, raised an eyebrow and asked, Brian, can you elaborate on how you weighted the demographic variables in your predictive model? The structure looks unconventional. Brian's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He had no clue what she was talking about, because he had never seen the analysis. I had developed that model from scratch, and now everyone in the room knew it. Brian tried one last desperate move. Well, I think maybe Alex could explain it better, he muttered, practically begging me to save him. My smile didn't waver. Of course, I said sweetly. I'd be happy to explain my process. I glanced at David. Just to clarify, I added calmly, this is the first time Brian is hearing any of this. He wasn't involved in this part of the project at all. Checkmate. Brian's face turned a deep shade of red, his hands trembling slightly as he realized just how badly he had screwed up. The silence that followed was deafening. The weight of a dozen pairs of eyes zeroed in on Brian, who was visibly unraveling. His face was beet red, his hands trembling as he fumbled with the presentation remote. He kept glancing at me, probably praying that I'd swoop in and save him, but I didn't. This was his mess. He had walked right into it, and now he was standing in front of everyone, exposed for the fraud he was. David cleared his throat, breaking the silence. His expression was unreadable, but there was a dangerous calm in his voice when he spoke. Brian, he said, slowly and deliberately, is what Alex just said true? Brian's mouth opened, then closed. His eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal, desperately searching for an escape route. I could practically see the panic running through his head. It was a collaborative effort, he mumbled, trying to force a smile. We both contributed. I raised an eyebrow. Collaborative effort? Wow. He was still trying to rewrite history. David's gaze hardened. Brian, he said, his voice like a scalpel now, cutting through the tension. Either you can explain your process, or you can admit that you had no part in it. The room was dead quiet. I could feel the anticipation hanging in the air like a storm about to break. Brian's lips moved, but no sound came out. He knew he was cornered. His voice cracked, and then finally he exhaled in defeat. I didn't do the analysis, he admitted, barely above a whisper. I almost felt bad for him. Almost. Brian's meltdown. If Brian had stopped there, maybe he could have salvaged a shred of dignity. But no, his ego couldn't handle the weight of humiliation. And what happened next was nothing short of spectacular. His face twisted with frustration, and before anyone could stop him, he launched into a rant that would have been hilarious if it weren't so pathetic. You know what? Brian snapped, throwing his hands in the air. Fine! You all want the truth? Here it is. I don't waste time doing grunt work. I focus on the big picture. That's what real leaders do. They let other people handle the details. The room collectively inhaled. Even the investors who had been quietly observing suddenly looked more interested. Hard work is overrated, Brian continued, his voice rising. You people are obsessed with data and details, but that's not how you get ahead. I delegate. I know how to manage people. That's what leadership is about. I blinked. Did he just say that out loud? David leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable but with a glint of something in his eyes. Amusement? Annoyance? It was hard to tell. So, let me get this straight, David said, his tone dangerously calm. You believe that real leaders don't need to do the work? They just take credit for it? Brian's jaw clenched, but he didn't back down. That's how the business world works, he muttered. Oh, Brian, you just signed your own death warrant. The calm before the storm. David exchanged a glance with Margaret Liu, the investor who had asked Brian about the demographic variables. Her expression was a mix of disbelief and barely concealed disgust. The other investors looked equally unimpressed. Interesting philosophy, David said, his voice dangerously smooth. But tell me, Brian, he paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough for the tension to thicken. If that's how you view leadership, why should I trust you with any project in this company? Brian's mouth opened, but nothing came out. That's not what I meant, he stammered. David raised a hand, cutting him off. No need to explain, he said, his tone clipped but polite. I think we've heard enough. Brian's confidence had evaporated, and now he looked like a man who realized he was standing on quicksand. Alex, David said, turning to me with an almost imperceptible nod. Anything else you'd like to add? I glanced at Brian. His eyes were pleading now, but I had no sympathy left. Just one thing, I said, my voice steady. I forwarded all my notes, drafts, and research documentation to HR before this meeting. Everything's time-stamped. I thought it might be useful in case there were any questions. Brian's face turned an even deeper shade of crimson. The evidence bombed. David's assistant, Melanie, who had been silently sitting near the door, stood up and handed a thick folder to him. Just arrived this morning, she said softly. David flipped through it casually, nodding as he skimmed the documents. Then he handed the folder to Margaret, who barely glanced at it before setting it down with a look of distaste. This is thorough, David murmured, looking at me with an expression that was equal parts impressed and relieved. Thank you, I said, keeping my tone polite but firm. Brian's breathing had become shallow. I could tell he was about to break. The moment it all fell apart. Brian, David said, his voice taking on that dangerous edge again. Check your email. Brian blinked. What? Your email, David repeated, his tone deadly calm. Go ahead, open it. Brian's hands were shaking as he pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen, scrolled, and then his face drained of all color. I knew exactly what he was looking at. Before the meeting, I had sent every piece of evidence, all the drafts, the project files, the emails where I tried to involve him, but got nothing but excuses, straight to HR. And I had CC'd David and the senior leadership team. It was all there, black and white, unshakable proof. You, Brian whispered, his voice barely audible. You planned this. I tilted my head, my expression cool and composed. No, Brian, I said softly. You planned this. I just made sure the truth came out. The beginning of the end. David let the silence linger for a moment before finally speaking. Brian, he said, his tone now devoid of any warmth. I'm going to need you to step outside while we discuss next steps. Brian blinked, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Wait, what? Now, Brian, David said, his voice leaving no room for argument. Brian looked around the room, but there were no allies left, no sympathetic faces, just cold, hard judgment. With a defeated sigh, he stood up, his shoulders slumped, and walked out of the room. The moment the door closed behind him, the tension that had been suffocating the room lifted. People exhaled, some shaking their heads in disbelief. Wow, Margaret said, leaning back in her chair. That was something. David rubbed his temples and let out a long breath. You have no idea, he muttered. Then he turned to me, and what he said next caught me completely off guard. The offer I never expected. Alex, David said, his expression thoughtful. Walk with me. I blinked. Sure. We stepped out into the hallway, and David remained quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. You handled that exceptionally well, he finally said, his voice softer now. Better than I expected. Thank you, I replied, not quite sure where this was going. He stopped walking and turned to face me fully. Do you want Brian's position? My mouth fell open. Wait, what? Senior strategist, David clarified. More pay, more responsibility, full credit for your work. I was stunned. Not because I didn't want it, I did, but because, for the first time in years, I felt seen. David was giving me the recognition that had been long overdue. Yes, I said, my voice steady. I want it. Good. David gave me a small, approving nod. We'll make it official after we clean up this mess. As I stood there, processing everything, one thought echoed in my mind. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about finally getting what I had earned. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had. The moment the door closed behind Brian, I finally let out the breath. I didn't realize I'd been holding. The tension that had gripped the room like a vice was gone, but my heart was still pounding in my chest. I glanced around the conference room, taking in the faces of the senior managers and investors. Relief, satisfaction, and most importantly, respect. For the first time, I wasn't just some behind-the-scenes workhorse. They had seen what I was capable of, and they knew who had truly driven this project forward. The aftermath. Brian didn't come back into the meeting. After he left, David took a few minutes to smooth things over with the investors. He reassured them that, despite the drama, the marketing strategy was solid and ready to move forward. Margaret Liu, who had been one of the most skeptical earlier, actually smiled as she leaned back in her chair. "Well, I'll say this," she said, her eyes flicking toward me. "If the rest of your team has half as much dedication as Alex, I don't think we have anything to worry about." A few of the other investors murmured their agreement, and I felt a quiet surge of pride. "Agreed," David said, giving me a quick nod before steering the conversation back to business. I kept my expression neutral, but inside, I was soaring. The fallout for Brian. I found out later that afternoon that Brian had been escorted out of the building by security. HR didn't waste any time once they saw the evidence I had provided. It was airtight, a damning timeline of his lies, manipulations, and outright theft of my work. By the end of the day, his email had been disabled, his desk cleared out, and his name scrubbed from the company directory. Good riddance. What surprised me, though, was how quiet it was after he left. No one rallied behind him. No one even seemed surprised. I guess when you spend your entire career stepping on other people to get ahead, you don't exactly build a support system. As I passed by his empty office on my way back from the break room, I couldn't help but pause for a moment. His nameplate was gone. His desk was spotless, like he had never even been there. Poetic. Moving up and moving on. The following week was a whirlwind. HR finalized the details of my promotion within days. The email came through on a Wednesday morning. Subject, promotion confirmation Alex. We're pleased to confirm your promotion to senior strategist. Effective immediately. Please see the attached documents for updated compensation and benefits details. Congratulations on your well-deserved advancement. Best, HR. I stared at the email for a long moment before a slow, satisfied smile spread across my face. Finally, I packed up my things that afternoon and moved into my new office, the one that used to belong to Brian. It felt symbolic. As I set down my favorite mug and arranged my desk, I took a moment to just breathe. All those years of hard work, all the late nights, the sacrifices, it had all been worth it. And now, I was sitting exactly where I belonged. The quiet apologies in the days that followed, something interesting happened. People who had once brushed me off or overlooked my contributions started noticing me. A lot of them, especially in upper management, came by my office to check in or congratulate me, but I could see the unspoken apologies in their eyes. "Alex, I just wanted to say, I'm really impressed with how you handled everything," said Lauren, one of the senior managers who had always favored Brian. We should have seen it sooner." I gave her a polite smile, but I didn't say much. I didn't need to. Her discomfort was enough. It was funny. People who had once treated me like an afterthought were suddenly eager to be on my good side. But I wasn't bitter. I didn't need their validation. I had already won. A conversation I didn't expect about a week after Brian's exit. I was packing up for the day when I heard a soft knock on my office door. I looked up and was surprised to see David standing there. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Of course," I said, gesturing for him to come in. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him, his expression more relaxed than I'd seen in a while. For a moment, he didn't say anything. He just looked around the office, my office, as if taking it all in. "You've earned this," he finally said, his voice quiet but firm. I should have recognized that sooner. I blinked, a little taken aback. "David." "No," he said, shaking his head. "I mean it. I let Brian skate by for too long because he knew how to play the game. But I see now that I was backing the wrong person." He paused, his gaze meeting mine, "and I won't make that mistake again." I didn't know what to say. For a moment, all I could do was nod. "Thank you," I finally murmured. "That means a lot." David gave me a small, genuine smile. "Don't thank me. Just keep doing what you're doing." He glanced at his watch, then gave me one last nod before heading for the door. But before he left, he turned back. "Oh, and Alex? Yeah? I'm putting you on the short list for the next VP promotion," he said casually, like he was talking about the weather. My heart skipped a beat. "Let's see where this takes us," he added, then walked out. I sat there for a long moment, my mind spinning. Holy hell, lessons learned. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into my new role. But something had shifted inside me. I wasn't just working hard for the sake of proving myself anymore. I was working hard because I loved what I did. And now, I was finally being recognized for it. And honestly, it felt amazing. But more than that, I realized something important. Hard work isn't overrated. It's underrated. Brian thought he could fake his way to success by charming people and cutting corners. And for a while, it worked. But when it came down to it, when the stakes were high and the real work needed to be done, he had nothing. Hard work builds something that can't be taken away. Skills, knowledge, integrity. And when you have those things, you win. Every single time. One last goodbye a month after everything went down, I ran into Brian, of all places, at a coffee shop near the office. He looked different, less polished. His usual cocky grin was gone, replaced with a tired, defeated expression. For a split second, I considered ignoring him, but then I didn't. "Brian," I said, my tone neutral but polite. He looked up, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of the old arrogance in his eyes, but it was gone just as quickly. "Alex," he mumbled, shifting uncomfortably. There was an awkward silence before he finally spoke again. I heard about your promotion," he muttered. "Congrats." "Thanks," I said, my smile cool but genuine. Another pause. I didn't think it would end like this," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "Funny thing about karma," I said softly, meeting his gaze. "It always catches up." Brian's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He just nodded and looked away. "Take care, Brian," I said, my tone final. And with that, I turned and walked away. The sweet taste of justice. As I stepped out into the crisp Boston air, I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight of being overlooked, underestimated, and used was gone. I had faced the storm, weathered it, and come out on the other side, stronger, wiser, and exactly where I was meant to be. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice, and it tasted damn good.